everybody, and welcome into the M&M Discipleship Podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a disciple of Christ. Our aim is to look for God in our daily lives, be in His Word, and strive to live out the teachings of Jesus. This is Dakota Moody, and I am joined by my co-host, Michael Round. Michael, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Yeah, it's been a busy couple of weeks, but
really
it is
busy
good to be
couple
back.
weeks for you, for sure.
Yeah.
You want to share with people the good news, or you want to wait for that till we get to our Where Have You Seen
good.
God segment?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
We welcomed our second child, Marley, into the world, and she is doing well. We had a couple of hiccups with that, but thankfully she is doing well. She's putting on weight, she's growing and healthy, and we are certainly thankful for that. But no, it's been a busy trying to adjust to that, but good to be back in the office. Good to be back recording with you, man.
So true, brother. Well, I think everybody will certainly understand why you missed a week in the pod, because not much better than having a child in the world that you can experience other than becoming a Christian. There's nothing better. So congratulations to you on that, and continued prayers for Marley and your family going forward. So happy for you there. So let's jump into, well, actually, one thing I want to cover before we get into things, just real quick. Because I don't know if we covered this before. This is called the M&M Discipleship Podcast, by the way. We talked about, me and Michael talked about this off camera, and we were debating on whether it was something that it needed to be stated why it's called the M&M Discipleship Podcast. Well, here's the thing. Michael's name is obviously Michael, and my last name is Moody. And I do Moody Ministries and things like that. So there's a lot of things involving M's in my life. So that's where the M&M comes from. It's not that we just really love the little chocolates that are the M&Ms, though I do. I don't know what Michael's feelings are towards M&Ms.
I'm a little more neutral. I prefer some of the other flavors. Like I like peanut M&Ms, and some of the other ones. I think I've had coffee ones. They're pretty
Of course,
good.
you like coffee ones.
If I remember right.
Of course, you like.
But yeah, the other ones I prefer the other flavors.
Peanut butter M&Ms are quite good, but I can't do the peanut M&Ms. I don't like nuts in my chocolate. It's just not what I do. Some people really love it. It's not my thing.
Yeah. But
so,
as with anything, they try and make something for everybody.
That is correct. That's correct. And that is not for me. They sell quite well. It's just I'm not gonna be the one buying them. So moving on to bigger, more spiritual topics. The first thing we want to do is we want to talk about where we have seen God this week in our lives, or in the recent weeks in our lives. And Michael, I want you to go ahead and you go ahead and tell us where you've seen God recently in your life.
Yeah. So I mentioned before that I've seen God work on the hearts of people, and we've had a lot of baptisms recently, and we actually had another one this past Sunday. And that was another instance where, God was working with somebody and doing things that I definitely did not see, and even other people close to him did not see. So it's beautiful to see God working. It's also easy to see God when you have the birth of a new baby. We spent some time in NICU, which is a hard to explain experience. And you can see how God works through the generosity and kindness of nurses, and just the togetherness that people have in dark times. And we really have been blessed by our church family. They've really surrounded us with a lot of love. And I don't even mean that just the local church we're working with here. Christian friends from all over that we know have come and been a blessing to us. So yeah, I see God working in different people, and pointing them toward Himself, pointing them toward Christ, but then also their generosity and kindness toward us during a challenging time.
Yeah, it's very easy to see God's hand when you see His people surround you in love and care during those times. It's sometimes hard to see the light in those dark moments, but oftentimes maybe that's when we see the light the brightest, is when we're in the darkest times in those situations. And so I'm glad that it's all worked out well in that way, and certainly a place where you can absolutely see God's hand working in the hearts and minds of other people while you're going through difficulties of your own. For myself, not this last week, but the week before, me and my wife attended the Harding lectureship, which was a real blessing to us. And uh, for those in the know, I have kind of uh, a love-hate relationship with my alma mater. I do love them dearly, hence why I'm wearing a shirt that literally has Harding on it. I've got a Harding cup behind me with a little bison, because I do love that I graduated from Harding. But there's certain things that certain people at the university put out and do that makes me sometimes a little bit tentative to go back, for
But you're going to find
spiritual
that anywhere. I mean,
experiences. You can't
that's
find that anywhere, but
you'll never. I mean, my alma mater's closed, so it's Harding's doing a lot of good in the world.
they are doing a lot of good in the world, and so that's where I can say that I do love Harding in that way. Just some of those things that he had some back and forth with, and I experienced some of that while I was in school. But as well, since I've been gone, some of the things I've heard that have happened and been pushed. But I will say, where I've seen God recently has been where I was with thousands of brothers and sisters in Christ there at that lectureship, and some of the keynotes that occurred, especially uh, Brother Steve Clower, which I know many of you are probably familiar with, his father Eddie Clower, and potentially if you are familiar with that, with Harding and the people there. But Steve Clower, who is a professor at Harding School of Theology, their grad school, just did a fantastic job of talking about Christ and Christ first, and the priority that we need to be setting as Christians about Christ, and how that is the main thing that we need to focus on more than anything else is Christ. And how important that is in our lives, that we just focus on Christ and his example and what he did for us. And some of the classes that we took, I was just very spiritually uplifted. And I just saw, as I kind of prefaced before about some of the things that have bothered me a little bit with Harding at different times, to see the unity, to see the bonding that was there, to see Christ being put first in that setting, and being able to come together with brothers and sisters of different levels of whatever within the church, to be able to come together and be able to have that experience. I saw God's hand working, and I saw God moving in that space, and I was incredibly uplifted by that. And so that was for me. Where did I see God? It was there. It was working there at Harding University, and something to where, if you have not been to the Harding lectureships and you are somebody who is a minister or an elder, or somebody who works in a congregation, or even just a member of a congregation, you want to be uplifted. Harding lectureships is something that is very special. And that's what I saw this last week while I was there.
Yeah, I'm sure that was a wonderful experience, and really what you're describing, Steve, talking about is really what we're going to get into with our passage today in Matthew chapter 5. If you have a Bible or just listening along, we're going to read Matthew 5, 14 to 16, a familiar passage. And, I've kind of gotten in the habit of saying this. We recognize that we are all at different points in our knowledge, but I've gotten in the habit of saying, if you aren't familiar with this familiar passage, I would encourage you to become familiar with it. Matthew 5, we're going to start in verse 13 and read through verse 16. I'll go ahead and read, Dakota, if that's good with you.
Absolutely.
You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Dakota, why do you think Jesus uses salt and light to describe our role as followers of him? Why do you think he used salt and light?
Well, I think one of the main reasons is you talk about two things that would have been very familiar with anybody in the audience at a different time. I think we've all been in a situation where we've been in the dark and we've seen light, and it has been a necessary thing. Think about whenever I leave the house every morning at about 6 a.m., my wife is still asleep, and I've got my phone light on, just trying to figure out how to get through a path to get out of the room, so that way I can head out of the house without trying to wake her up. We need that light sometimes when we're in dark places, as well as it regards salt. Talk about something that for nowadays we take for granted, but during that day and age, it was not taken for granted. In fact, it was tremendously valuable. Salt was, whether it was to flavor or preserve food in that way. And obviously, if you have studied this passage at all, you will be familiar. Somebody would have told you about the preserving agent that is salt and how important that is to preserving people. And
Mm.
I've got a few more things to say about that. But Michael, why don't you give your thoughts on them as well?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And if you don't have these things, they're they're hugely important that you get them.
You live
I
in a
just think
bland
about,
and dark world if you live without
yeah,
salt and light.
exactly. I mean, light, more so for me.
Hmm.
I'm someone who admits that I'm afraid of the dark. I don't enjoy the dark. Um, darkness that you can feel, that's difficult to endure.
Hmm.
When thinking about having a newborn at home, one of the more important things for us is, let's figure out our lamp situation. Because
Hmm.
when you wake up in the middle of the night, it's a delicate balance. You
Hmm.
don't want it to be too bright in there. Well, A, you don't want to wake up all that much, but you also don't want to stimulate your child to where they're just like, okay, it's daytime, let's
Yeah.
get going. Um,
Hmm.
so that's something that we put a lot of thought into.
Yeah.
And because you were exactly right, especially when you have kids and there are little toys and little things all over your floor. If you don't watch where you're going, you'll end up getting hurt pretty quick. But
Absolutely.
yeah, being able to see, and for us as Christians, we were actually talking about this past weekend, and one of our elders mentioned how we are guideposts for people,
Mm.
and we have done our driveway, different light posts that illuminate our driveway. And I just think about that, us as Christians are trying to illuminate the path for other people, to try and
Mm.
point them to the Lord. Jesus is saying we are the light of the world. We're supposed to reflect his light in this world so that people can see our good works and give glory to God. It's ultimately that people are pointed to God and not to us.
That's right.
So you said you had other things to say,
Well, and the
along
and you
that.
kind of led to an example that I want to give, because obviously we talk about the light and being lights to help guide other people towards the light, being those little reflections in that way, and how important that is. Um, Another thing that I think that is important about this passage is that when we talk about salt and light, we talk about, as Christians, there's a little bit of a debate sometimes about how we should interact with the world, right? Um, we are, being Michael, are ministers, of course. And so sometimes for us, the people who we interact with pretty much all the time are people of faith, people in the church, right? We don't necessarily have as much dealings with people in the outside world. But for many who are working in secular jobs and things like that, um, you have a lot more interaction with the world at this point, and people who are in the world. And to be salt and light in a world is crucial to the Christian light, but also not losing your salt and light. So there's two extremes that people can often fall into. Either you are trying to be so much holier than thou that you separate yourself from the world, and you no longer are, while you may be salt and light, you are no longer helping the people who are in darkness, right?
Mm,
But there's the flip side of that, which is what Christ warns here about. If you are the salt of the earth, but you lose your saltiness, you lose the thing that makes you different and special, which is Christ, then it all falls apart at
yeah.
the end. And so you've just become part of the world. You're no longer helping to preserve people from the world or guide people out of the world. You are just becoming like the world. And in so doing, you are not helping people come to Christ, but you are instead really keeping them away from Christ in that way. And so it's crucial for us as Christians to be able to balance that, not think we're so holier than thou that we shouldn't interact with the world, because we are called to be lights in the world and to be in the world, be the salt of the world, but also not to fully give into the world and lose the light and lose the saltiness that makes us the people of God, that is supposed to be leading people away from the world.
Yeah, yeah. And with that, like, you mentioned the salt, but he also says in verse 15 about the light. You don't put a light and put it under a basket, light a lamp and put it under a basket. You don't put it in a corner somewhere where it's going to be hidden. There's
Mm-hmm.
going to be shadows. You put it in the most advantageous spot. You put it on a stand to where it gives light to the whole room, to
Okay.
all in the house, it says there. So we need to position ourselves well, that we are seen by others. And again, this is a delicate balance of being seen and being out there without being showy or without being pompous or flaunting our good works. And, look how great I am. And, because there is an element here of other people seeing those good works. And so we need to strike that balance. So, but yeah, we need to position ourselves in such a way that the world sees us and they're pointed and illuminated, the path to God is illuminated through us. We're able to see the goodness of God. They're able to see the goodness of God through us.
That's right. Well, Michael, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I was gonna say, just any other thoughts or comments on that before we move forward?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to be salt and light in this world. So if you are struggling right now to find some ways to be set yourself apart, I'd say look to the light of the world, and it will help and guide you to be that salt and light. So we need to look to how to be salt and light in this world as much as we can in our own lives, whatever that means in your context. So Michael, why don't you go ahead and tell us what you've been reading recently?
So I have kind of gotten in the habit of, we've all had Amazon carts that don't meet the required threshold for free shipping.
Oh, absolutely.
So I've
got to buy that extra one.
Yes, I've gotten in the habit where I throw a book in there. And so I've got kind of a list of books. And so one of the ones that I've had for a little while, and I got it recently, is Make Your Bed. It's by Admiral William H. McRaven. You might have seen on social media the commencement speech that Admiral McRaven gave at the University of Texas in 2014. Yeah, he closes it by hook 'em horns and whatever, more horns down. But he gave a great speech, phenomenal speech. And Make Your Bed is about that speech. And he gave 10 things that if you want to change the world, you need to do them. And the first one he says is start off by making your bed. You start your day with a task completed. And he points out that those small victories, those small things matter and how valuable that is. But anyways, he's a Navy SEAL. He was a Navy SEAL for, I think, 37 years. And a lot of his stories are around SEAL training or just his time in the military. But they're really interesting stories that apply to all of life. I'll just share a couple of his points. Like I said, he's got 10 of them. If you don't want to read the book, I would encourage you to watch the speech. It's less than 20 minutes. It's beautiful. You can find it on YouTube. But the one he talks about is get over being a sugar cookie and keep moving forward. So in SEAL training, one of the punishments is they put you out in the surf. You get completely wet. They're on the beach, and where they train. You get completely wet, and then they have you come back and roll around in the sand. And then they kick sand on you, and they get you completely covered in sand. And so they call that being a sugar cookie, being wet and covered in sand. He says, get over it. You're going to do that sometimes. And sometimes it wasn't even because you did something wrong. It was just they wanted to punish you. So get over that and keep moving forward. You got to make do with that. One that was pretty frightening to me personally, I'm also afraid of open water, is don't back down from the sharks. One of the things that they do is an open swim out to an island. And I want to say it's like 5 miles or it's something very long in the middle of the night. And there are all kinds of sharks that they are warned about. And he said, he's talking about how you need to have courage. You just need to keep going. And sharks know when you're struggling, and they circle and they watch and they try and attack those that are struggling. So just keep going. And the last one that I think has some really good spiritual ramifications is during one of their most difficult training weeks, they're down in the mud flats. I think Tijuana mud flats. That's what the name that comes to my mind in Southern California. But anyways, they were offered a chance to quit. They were just in the midst of grueling training, and there were a couple people that were going to quit. They were ready to get up and leave. But then while they're all there in the mud, one person started singing, and then another person started singing, and then another person. And before long, the whole group was singing while they're in the mud, struggling, straining. And the sergeants were trying to get them to quit singing, and they just wouldn't. They just kept going. And the people that were ready to quit came back and were a part of the group again. And so he says, start singing when you're up to your neck in mud. And I think there's some big spiritual application for that, when we're in difficult times, start singing. And that's one of the things that I try and
Reference
do.
Paul and Silas there.
Yeah. They're in prison. But when I'm in a difficult time, I try and put on gospel music and start singing, and that helps me. But anyways, really good book, short book. I read it in like 3 days, I think. But Make Your Bed, really good book by Admiral McRaven.
That's you said sugar cookie, and I got excited because that's by far my favorite kind of cookie. But then I learned what that sugar cookie was, and I don't want nothing to do with that sugar cookie. It's about the only sugar cookie I don't want something to do with, because I do love sugar cookies. But that sounds horrible.
We've all had sand in places we didn't want sand.
Oh my goodness!
Just imagine spending the rest of the day covered in sand.
Horrible. Or doing some kind of training after that. Like it's annoying enough walking back to your hotel from the beach whenever you got sand all over the place. Now try to do some training to be an elite soldier with. I mean, it's just not great. But I think that a lot of good things in that, because he talks about some of the worst experience you could think of being in that open water at night sounds horrifying to me.
Yes.
But to be able to overcome those kind of things and being able to kind of use that as example in lives is just so important for us to be able to remember some of those things. Don't not to give up so easy, and to keep pressing on in that way. The book I've been reading recently has been Small Church Essentials by Carl Vaughters. I'd call him Vatas, but because of my German pronunciation, but Carl, maybe it's Vaders, but he is talking about in this book how to lead in small, healthy congregations. And I think this is so important, a book like this, because when we think about churches, there's kind of a negative connotation sometimes to smaller churches, even though, by the way, more than 70% of the churches in America are less than 150 people. Most churches are smaller than 150 people. Actually, most churches are even smaller than 100 people. And it's not necessarily always because they're unhealthy. Now, there's a lot of churches out there that used to be 300 members who are now 100 or less because they were unhealthy. But there's a lot of very healthy churches that operate in a lower number. And I think sometimes we forget that small churches are important too, and that they can still be healthy and run well. This is important for me because I'm at kind of a smaller congregation right now. And it's always kind of a negative context when somebody says, "Oh, you're the minister at where?" "This congregation." "Oh, how big is it?" That's always the second question. And Michael will be familiar with this as a minister of a congregation. "Okay, you're the minister at blank church. What's the average attendance? How many people end up coming most often?" And I think it's important for us to remember that not only sometimes does the small churches can be healthy, but that they are important, and really important to different communities and different people who are in different situations, and they can be run well and efficiently and at the level that God would call them to, even if they're not a 2, 3, 4, 500 member or more congregation. They can still be a blessing to the kingdom. And that's important for me right now, working at a church that is less than 100 people on a Sunday. And I think it's important for everybody who is out there. If you are a minister or an elder or somebody who is working in a smaller congregation in ministry in some way, shape, or form, I encourage you to read that book, because it may change your idea about what small church is, and the value of small churches, and what that can and should look like.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And I can't remember who said it, but I remember a minister saying in a lecture that, some of God's greatest servants, best servants, are in churches that you've never heard of. You've never heard of them, but they've been working faithfully for 30, 40, 50 years, or
right.
Maybe not long, but they're doing important work. Every church, or each church needs leadership and needs people to be involved, and small churches are no different. And there's some special people in small churches, and so that's a really important thing. And with that, it's relevant that to point out here, whatever context you're in, make the best of it. Look for ways that you can be a better minister, like you are reading about that book. That's what I would encourage other people. Whatever situation you're in, look for material to read or to listen to that would help you to grow.
Absolutely. We always need to be figuring out how to grow in our situations, where regardless of what that means, whether it's a member at a congregation of 50, a minister at a congregation of 150, or an elder at a congregation of 500. We all need to figure out how we can embetter ourselves in whatever we're doing, especially as it regards our life of faith. Before we close out, Michael, is there anything else you'd like to add to our discussion today?
No. Just really appreciate you guys following along, and thank y'all for being with us.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you all, as we said, being here. Make sure, if you're not subscribed to the podcast, that you go ahead and subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We put this out on as well on social media on a weekly basis. So you're always welcome to join us. And if you like the videos, if you like what we're doing here, the podcast as well, please make sure to share that with your friends. Let other people know about the M&M Discipleship Podcast. So that way we can get the word out about helping other people to grow closer to God and what they're doing. So thank you all for joining us today on the M&M Discipleship Podcast. Until next time, let's look for God, learn from His Word, and live out His teachings. Bye for now.